Hi there, I'm Paul Belflem and this is Industrial Organization. In this presentation we want to talk about menu pricing. More precisely, our objective is to understand how a monopoly firm chooses its prices when it practices menu pricing. You can get some background reading in sections 9.1 and 9.2 in the textbook, but what we cover here is a simplified version of what is presented in the book. Right, so first let me remind you of the difference between menu and group pricing. In the case of group pricing, and that applies also to personalized pricing, which is an extended or extreme version of group pricing, in group pricing there is the possibility for the seller to identify directly consumers through some characteristic which is observable and verifiable. And of course this characteristic matters because it's related to the willingness to pay of the different groups. Okay, so a typical example is the student discount. Students have a lower willingness to pay for many things like movie theaters tickets, and it makes sense to offer them a lower price. Okay, and this is possible to do so because you can verify whether a person is a student or not by asking them to show their student ID. Okay, so the characteristic that matters, being a student or not, is verifiable. Now, there are many situations where the characteristic that matters in terms of how much consumers are willing to pay is not directly observable. Okay, there is no card or nothing you can observe to make sure that you could put consumers in different segments and charge different prices for these different segments. Okay, so basically, the willingness to pay is said to be a private information of the consumers. It's an information that the consumers have, but the seller doesn't have. So there is asymmetric information, and how can the seller cope with that? Well, the seller has to find some mechanism by which consumers will be incentivized to reveal their information. Okay, and the idea here is to identify some product dimension that is valued differently by the consumers, and then to design a menu of options of different versions of the product which are differentiated along this dimension that matters for the consumers. Okay, we'll see examples on the next slide. What matters here in this presentation is then to find the right prices, to make sure that the prices are such that the version that is targeted to a particular group will be indeed bought by this group and not by another group. Okay, so this is called menu pricing, or also versioning, because there are different versions of the product. In more technical terms, it's an example of second-degree price discrimination, or it could be also called nonlinear pricing. Okay, and also more generally, if you relate this to the theory of asymmetric information, we have here what is called a screening problem, in the sense that the uninformed party, the seller, is trying to bring the informed parties, here the buyers, to reveal their private information. Right? So here are some examples that you can find in digital economy. Versioning can be based on quality, so you offer different versions that have different levels of quality. For example, in the software world, some versions are called nagware because they are nagging for the consumers, they annoy them. It's generally a free version that is financed by advertising, but the consumers may be annoyed by the advertising, and the more annoyed they are, the more they're willing to pay a higher price for a full version that is not displaying any advertising. Okay, so the annoyance here is a discriminating device. Now, what is very common also is to have different versions that will be released at different time periods. The cheaper version, for example, for a book, will be released immediately, and then later you will have a paperback that is meant for consumers who are not so obsessed to read immediately the novel of a particular author and can wait typically 1 year to get the book at a lower price. Same thing for movies. You have different windows of release that come also with different prices. And finally, in many situations, but also for software and for newspaper, for example, you've got different versions based on quantity. Here the idea is that you would pay a lower price per unit the larger the number of units you buy. Okay, and this is typically the case with a subscription. If you buy a newspaper and you subscribe for a whole year, the price per newspaper per day is much lower than if you go to the bookshop and buy directly your newspaper there, okay, or your magazine. Right. So let's go to an example. On purpose here to see how prices will be set by the monopolist to induce the self-selection of the consumers. And we take an example with two versions of a product and also two types of consumers. Okay, so let's start with the two versions. It's a software, and you've got the basic and the pro version. The pro version has a higher quality. Let's say that it's an advanced editing software that allows you to type text and mathematics in a very smooth way. And this is the basic version, but the pro version also allows the user to make some computations very easily. Okay, the cost of producing an extra unit of this software is zero, whatever the version. Okay, now there are 120 potential consumers. They are split between two categories. There are universities, call them the high type, and businesses, call them the low type. So universities, they are more interested in this advanced computing functionalities. Okay, and so they are willing to pay more for the pro version with respect to the basic version than the businesses. Okay, so these are the willingness to pay. So let's detail them. For the pro version, the universities are willing to pay 9 and the businesses are willing to pay 3. And for the basic version, the universities are willing to pay 5 and the businesses are willing to pay 2. Okay, so universities are willing to pay more than businesses for both versions, but what really matters here is that universities are willing to pay more to upgrade, to go from the basic to the pro version, than businesses are. Okay, businesses are willing to pay an addition of 1 to go from the basic to the pro version, but universities are willing to pay an extra 4 to go from the basic to the to the pro version. Sorry. Okay, so I'm not explaining this notation here. You can find this in the book, but this is an example of what is called, in theory, the single crossing property. Okay, and this is important for menu pricing to work, that the dimension you've identified and along which you create the versions of the product, this dimension must be such that one group is willing to pay more to get this extra value than the other group. Okay, so these are the numbers that are known by the firm, also known by the different buyers. And we want now to compare different forms of pricing, either a uniform price, where the same price applies to all users. Then we will look at group pricing, where it's possible for the seller to know who is who. And finally, we will look at menu pricing, and we will compare all these different forms of pricing. Right, so uniform pricing. So suppose here that what the firm chooses is to set the same price for everyone. Okay. Well, the cost of producing any version is the same, right? And it's clear that the pro version can be more profitable to sell because both universities and businesses are willing to pay more. Okay, so if you set a uniform price, you're going to sell the pro version. Now, at which price, that depends on how many universities there are. Okay, either you set a high price and only universities will buy, so that price would be 9, and you would sell a quantity lambda, and your profit would be 9 lambda. Okay, or you decide to try and sell also to businesses, then you've got to lower the price to 3. You would sell 120 units because all your consumers would buy, and you would make a profit of 360. Now, what is the best thing to do? Well, that depends on the value of lambda. If there are more than 40 universities, it's better to concentrate on them and just sell at a very high price and not serve the businesses. But if lambda is less than 40, then it's better to try and reach all the consumers with a low price. Okay, so keep in mind now that the profit under uniform price is the maximum between these two values, 9 lambda and 360. Okay, so we keep that somewhere. We will come back to this when we compare to other forms of pricing. Okay, now if you do personalized pricing, so that would be a situation where when the firm received an order, the firm knows for sure that this order comes from a university or from a business. Okay, and we will assume that there is no reselling, no arbitrage between the two. So in that case, the firm would be able to set different prices for universities and for businesses. Okay, again, there is no reason to sell the basic version. This is for sure less profitable, so you sell the pro version, but now you can sell it at the highest price for universities and at the higher price for businesses. Okay, no need to set a uniform price here. Let us now turn to menu pricing. So that's a situation where the seller is not able to tell universities and business apart. If an order comes to the seller, it can come from a university or from a business without the seller being able to check that. Okay, so group pricing, personalized pricing is not possible, but menu pricing becomes an option. The idea here is to offer two versions of the product and price them in such a way that universities will find it better for them to buy the pro version, while businesses will find it better for them to buy the basic version. So in a sense, the menu pricing will induce self-selection. Although the universities and businesses can choose any version, if the prices are chosen in the right way, they will go for the version that is targeted to them. Okay, so the problem is really to find these prices, what we call incentive compatible prices, because these prices have to be compatible with the incentives that the seller wants to give to the two types of consumers. And I repeat, the idea is to have the pro version being bought by universities and the basic version being bought by businesses. Okay, so we are going to try and find these prices, but to make sure we understand all the constraints that the seller has to respect, we are going to force ourselves to make mistakes. Okay, so we use trial and error. So let's look at a first trial. We will quickly realize that this is not the right prices, but we will learn why. This is what is important here. Okay, so let's be greedy and try to set the highest possible price for the pro version and the highest possible price for the basic version. Okay, so we set the price equal to the willingness to pay of universities for the pro version. So we set the price of the pro version to 9, and we try also by setting the price of the basic version to 2, so as to extract the full consumer surplus from the businesses. Now, what happens here? Why doesn't it work? Well, look at the universities. How do you choose, basically, if you have two options like this? Well, you are going to choose the option that leaves you with the highest consumer surplus. And the consumer surplus, remember, is the difference between what you're willing to pay, your maximum price, and what you actually pay. Okay, so let's do this for universities. If they buy the pro version, they're willing to pay 9, and they have to pay 9, so that leaves them with a surplus of 0. Whereas if they buy the basic version, the price is 2, but they're willing to pay 5, so they are left with a surplus of 3, which is better for them. Okay, so the basic version provides the universities with a lower utility, but because it's priced sufficiently cheaply, it's still a better option to buy this lower quality version than to buy the high quality version, which is too expensive. Okay, so with these prices, self-selection is not achieved. The prices don't do what they're supposed to do, which is to incentivize universities to buy the pro version instead of the basic version. Okay, so we understand that there is a constraint here, call it the self-selection or the incentive compatibility constraint. The price difference between the two versions cannot be larger than the premium that universities are willing to pay to go from the basic to the pro version. Okay, this difference is 4, and so in this specific case, the difference of prices between the pro version and the basic version cannot exceed 4. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Now, let's make a second trial. Based on that, well, what is the next logical step for a seller that is greedy? Well, let's keep the price of the pro version to 9 and have the price of the basic version to 5. Okay, so that we respect this constraint. This is what we propose here. Well, here you quickly see that it doesn't work either, because the basic version is simply too expensive for the businesses. Okay, what they are willing to pay for the basic version is just 2, and in that case they prefer not to buy at all. Okay, and so self-selection in a sense is achieved, but you were also supposed to make sure that the businesses would buy the basic version rather than not buying anything. Okay, so this this proposition here violates what is called a participation constraint. Okay, so one thing is to make sure that there is a self-selection, and in that case, what mattered was that the universities would buy the pro version, but you also need to make sure that the businesses prefer to buy the basic version rather than not buying it all. Okay, and to satisfy this second constraint, well, clearly the price of the basic version cannot exceed the willingness to pay of the businesses. Okay, so we've got these two strong constraints. If we put them together, we reach the solution to the problem, which is the optimum for the seller, given the constraints that it has to satisfy. So we start with the price of the basic version, which cannot be larger than 2. And given that the difference between the pro version and the basic version cannot be larger than 4, we can compute the price of the pro version as 2 plus 4 is equal to 6. Okay, and we know that in this case the profit is as follows. There are lambda universities buying at a price of 6, and there are 120 minus lambda businesses buying at the price of 2, and so the total is this here. Okay, so what comes next now is to compare this profit and the menu pricing with the profit and the group pricing, and we already know that the profit and the menu pricing is going to be lower, but we want to understand why. And more importantly, we want to know whether the profit and the menu pricing is larger than the profit and the uniform pricing. Okay, so does it really pay to create this new version, the basic version, and put it on the market? And we will see that it depends. It depends crucially on the number of universities. Okay, let's do that now. Right, now we want to compare the results on the menu and group pricing. Well, we already expect that the profits on the menu pricing will be lower than on the group pricing. Remember, group pricing, which is the same as personalized pricing here, because all universities are the same and all businesses are the same. So group pricing here gives you the largest possible profit. So you can only do worse when you do menu pricing, but we want to understand why the profit is lower, what are the sources of the decrease in profit when you do menu pricing. Actually, there are two types of losses. First of all, the businesses now are offered the low quality product instead of the high quality product. Okay, remember, the seller had to introduce this basic version on the market in order to induce the self-selection of the two categories of consumers, right? And so if you look at the businesses, they were paying 3 for the pro version and the group pricing, and now they are only paying 2 for the basic version, so you lose 1 for the 120 minus lambda businesses. Okay, and the other source of loss comes from the universities. Okay, and for a similar reason, in order to induce self-selection, you've introduced on the market this basic version, which is now another possibility which is given to the universities. And so what they're willing to pay for the pro version now is just the extra value that the pro version gives them with respect to the basic version. Whereas on the group pricing, the only choice that they had was the pro version. And otherwise, they would get zero utility if they were not buying this pro version. Okay, so in a sense, you've introduced here a form of competition for universities, because now they can choose between two products. Okay, and so on the group pricing, they would pay 9 for the pro version, but now they only pay 6. Okay, and so you lose 3 for each of the lambda universities. If you put together these two sources of loss, you get the addition of these two, which gives you the total difference between the menu pricing, the profit on the menu pricing, and the profit on the personalized or group pricing. Okay, so let's take stock of what we have learned so far. If you have a monopolist that offers two pairs of price and quality to two types of consumers, then prices are chosen to fully appropriate the consumer surplus of the low types. So here, these low types consumers are the businesses, and they indeed pay the maximum price they're willing to pay for the basic version. As for the high type consumers, the universities in our example, they obtain a positive surplus, so they pay less than the maximum price they would be willing to pay, and this positive surplus is called the information rent. Okay, and this comes from the fact that they can always choose the low quality product instead. Right? Now we turn to the comparison between menu pricing and uniform pricing. Here the question is, under which conditions will menu pricing be more profitable for the seller with respect to the alternative of setting the same price for everyone? Now, we need to do this comparison in two steps because remember, under uniform pricing, there are two possible situations. Either, and this is the first one we consider, there are sufficiently many universities. In this case, there are at least 40 universities. And so if you do uniform pricing in that case, well, the firm would only sell to universities. This is profitable enough to focus on this segment of the market. The corresponding profit would be 9 times lambda. Now, if you compare the profit under menu pricing to this profit under uniform pricing, there are two differences. On the one hand, there is what is called cannibalization. This is what we already noticed before. Universities pay less for the pro version under menu pricing than they would do under uniform pricing. Okay, and that means a loss of 3 per university. But there is a positive impact now if you go from uniform pricing to menu pricing. The introduction of the basic version, which is meant for the businesses, leads to what is called a market expansion. Okay, the businesses under uniform pricing wouldn't buy anything. Okay, the price is 9, they wouldn't buy at that price. But with menu pricing, now they have the opportunity to buy. And from the seller's point of view, this is a positive expansion of the market. They pay 2, and there are 120 minus lambda businesses, so there is a gain of this much. And if you add up the loss coming from the cannibalization effect to the gain coming from the market expansion, well, the total is positive if there are not too many universities, so if lambda is less than 48. Okay, and if this is so, then the firm would choose menu pricing, and that would benefit the consumers. The firm is certainly better off. Universities are also strictly better off because they pay a lower price, and the businesses are as well off. They get a surplus of 0, but you could say that they prefer to buy a product, the basic version, rather than buying nothing. Okay, but the important message here is that there is a condition, or there is a possibility, I should say, that the firm would prefer menu pricing. The condition is here. And if it does, then everybody benefits from that. Okay, so this is welfare increasing. Let's look now at the second case. In this second scenario, we have a small number of universities which under uniform pricing would lead the firm to sell at a low price, to sell the pro version at a price of 3, so as to sell to all the consumers. Okay, in that case, the profit would be equal to 360. So if you go from uniform pricing to menu pricing in that case, you cannot expand the market, or everyone is already buying under uniform pricing. Okay, so here the two effects of going from uniform pricing to menu pricing is that the businesses, they buy the basic version and the menu pricing instead of the pro version. That means a loss for the seller. They lose 1 for each of the businesses. Okay, but universities under menu pricing, they pay 6 for the pro version instead of paying just 3, which is what they would pay under uniform pricing. Okay, so there is a gain of 3 per university. Now, again, you need to look at the balance between the gain and the loss. This is what is done here. There is a net gain as long as there are at least 30 universities on the market. Okay, so it's still possible under the second scenario to find values of lambda between 30 and 40 that would make menu pricing profitable for the seller, but in that case we can check that it would reduce welfare. Okay, it's profitable for the firm, but it reduces the utility for universities. It leaves businesses as well off, but the reduction of utility for universities is larger than the profit gain for the firm. And so if you put together the well-being of the firm and the two kinds of consumers, the total effect is negative. Okay, so let us summarize the results we have seen. So the question was, when is menu pricing profitable for the firm, and when is menu pricing profitable, or I should say welfare increasing? Well, our measure here is the number of universities. It goes from 0 to 100. If there is uniform pricing, we know that for lambda less than 40, the firm would sell to all consumers, so universities and businesses alike. But if there are at least 40 universities, it's more profitable for the firm under uniform pricing to sell to universities only. Now, if you look at what happens at the menu pricing, well, there is one scenario which is good for everyone. Okay, so if the number of universities is somewhere between 40 and 48, then menu pricing is profitable and so would be chosen by the firm, and it is also increasing the welfare, so it benefits also the consumers. Now we have the opposite result. If lambda is somewhere between 30 and 40, then menu pricing is profitable and would be chosen by the firm, but that would reduce welfare. That would in particular make universities worse off compared to uniform pricing. Finally, for all other values of lambda, menu pricing is not profitable and will not be chosen by the firm. Right, so we summarize the results here. First of all, menu pricing is optimal if the proportion of high-type consumers is neither too small nor too large. High-type consumers, in our example, are universities. And second condition, if going from low to high quality increases surplus proportionally more for high-type consumers and for low-type consumers. Okay, so this is the condition we verified at the very start of our exercise. Universities are willing to pay a larger premium to go from the basic version to the pro version than businesses are. Okay, now if we look at the welfare effect of menu pricing, we see that menu pricing improves welfare if selling the low quality leads to an expansion of the market. Okay, otherwise menu pricing deteriorates welfare. Right, so let us just mention one further result. It may be the case that a firm would find it profitable to add on the market a version that is of lower quality and at the same time is more costly to produce. Okay, so if you hear that, you would say, well, this is silly. Why would I, as a firm, introduce a product which consumers don't like that much? It's seen as lower quality, and on top of that, it's more costly for me to produce it. Okay, so I'm certainly, if I compare this version, damaged version that I'm introducing to the original version that I have, well, I can only make lower profits on this new version because consumers are willing to pay less and it costs me more to produce. Okay, so why would that be interesting to introduce this other version? Well, for the reasons we have just seen, to price discriminate. Okay, because it would allow you to expand the market and target a product to those consumers that you wouldn't serve if you were selling just one product at a uniform price. Okay, so and there are examples of what is called damaged goods. Okay, so let's just take, well, these are all examples, things that you probably have never seen. But take this example here of one of the first laser printers, IBM E, Well, this IBM E was identical to the original printer, but there was a piece of software within the printer that was limiting the printing to 5 rather than 10 pages per minute. Okay, so we're talking about something decades ago, right? And you can read the other examples. That the same idea that the original product has been damaged to create a new version that was sold, of course, at a lower price in order to try and reach those consumers that otherwise you wouldn't find profitable to sell to. And this is all I wanted to share with you on this topic. And it's goodbye from me. Bye-bye.